Okay, the sermon title today is The Case Against Worry. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to deal with this issue of worry. And it's important, I think, because of the verses that I read, where you see Jesus telling us 3 times not to worry. You see it in verse 25 when he says, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life." It's not really a suggestion. It's not, hey, try not to worry. Do not worry is a command. Okay, so do not worry. He says that in verse 25. Then he says it again down in verse 31 when he says, "Therefore, do not be anxious." Then he says it in verse 34. "Therefore, do not be anxious." So if you had kids growing up, you tell them something, and then they maybe in case you didn't hear it that time, let me tell you again. And maybe if you didn't hear it that time, let me tell it to you one more time. Okay, so some of you are like, "No, I told them once," and then they better hear. But a lot of times you give your kids a second chance or a third chance, and the point is, do not worry, do not worry, do not worry. This is here for emphasis. And worry is something that I think we, as particular children of God, struggle with. We're anxious people. And I know we have an election coming up in a week and a half or a week or so. And it seems like, man, we get around this time and everybody gets anxious. You know, is my particular candidate, are they going to get voted out? Are they going to get voted in? I don't know what's going to happen. And we put a lot into elections, and we should participate in the process. I'm not against any of that. I participate in the process. But man, you got to be careful about putting your hope in politicians, okay, or in the government in general. Our hope is in the Lord, right? So the point being that, man, we can really worry about stuff. And worry is something that's very easy to become addicted to. There's people that worry about everything. If they can't find something to worry about, they worry about that because something bad must be right around the corner, right? That tend to be how we are. So Jesus, what he does here is he makes the case against worry. He's engaging our brain here, and he's telling us, all right, I want you to think about this. These are some things you need to think about when it comes to worry. And this is something that I need to combat worry with truth. Worry is I'm believing something that I don't know whether or not it's going to happen. It's a lie. I want to combat that lie with truth. And Jesus gives us a lot of truth to focus on in this particular passage. So I have 6 things for you today that Jesus says this is the case against worry, why we should do what he says. We should do what he says because he said to do it. But he's going to give us then 6 reasons. I'm going to make some cases why you should do what I tell you to do. Okay? Because God would have every right to say, if I say, why should I do this? He'd say, because I'm God. You ever pull that out as your parents? You know, why should I do this, Dad? Because I'm your dad. Do what I say. Okay, in the same way, why should I do this, God? Well, because I'm God. But God does more than that, which is then he tells us why worry is a problem. Okay, so number 1, worry is unreasonable. Worry is unreasonable. And that's what we find in verse 25 when he says, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? So he points out 3 particular areas. What we're going to eat, what we're going to drink, and what clothes we're going to wear. You have to understand here who Jesus is talking to. Jesus is talking to people who legit, many of them are poor, and they legit do not know where their next meal is coming from. They don't know where they're going to eat next. They don't have a house full of food like we got. Okay, so they don't know where they're going to eat. They don't have the water supply we have. Do you know you can drink tap water and you will not die? Right? Did any of you grow up? I mean, that's what I grew up on was tap water. You know, it's like the whole concept. I'll never forget when bottled water came out. My father's like, I am not buying bottled water. You know, now he has a million of them in his house. And that's not a bad, we like purified water, okay? So we live in a time where, like, we live off of Lindy Spring. We love Lindy Spring, you know. We go down and fill the big 5-gallon thing, and so Lindy Spring's great. It's purified water. And to me, it does taste better than the stuff out of the tap. So you understand how much excess we have? We have so much water that we have the nasty taste of water, which is tap water, which is safe to drink, but then we have this is better water. And how about the clothes that we wear? He's talking to people that have one set of clothes, maybe two. So Jesus is telling this group of people, hey, you don't know where your next meal's coming from. Your water source is sparse. Many of you live in a desert. And you got one set of clothes that may wear out soon. Don't worry about your life. So if Jesus said that to them, what would he say to us? Where we have abundance upon abundance. We have water sources available to us everywhere. And our closets are loaded. We have so many clothes that we take most of them to Goodwill. So if Jesus would say that to a group of people who don't know where they're going to eat their next meal, it is unreasonable for me to worry. And what he's saying is life is more important than what we eat or drink. And we get kind of hung up on those things. We get hung up on styles, and we get hung up on the food that we eat and the water that we drink. But worry is unreasonable. That's really his first point there. Number two, worry is unnecessary. So he gives us an example in verse 26. Worry is unreasonable, worry is unnecessary. The example is the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? So he makes a couple of things really clear here. Look, I like animals. I'm tempted to say a joke right here, but I like animals. They taste great. But anyway. But I'm not a hunter. This bothers people when I say this, but I don't own a gun. I don't have a gun I don't want a gun in my house. Don't give me a gun. It's okay. I know a lot of people that own guns, so I'll just go to their house. When the apocalypse happens, I'll go to their house. Not against guns. I have nothing. I just don't. I owned a gun before. When I was a young person, I worked as a security guard, and we had to be armed, and I owned a gun then. Once I quit the job, I got rid of the gun, okay? The reason why is because I think if you own a gun, you got to be willing to use it, and I'm not willing to use it. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. And I don't hunt. I would be a vegetarian if I had to kill my own meat. I'll tell you that right now. I would eat out of the ground. But I do like a good steak. And I know many of you are hunters, and all of that's good stuff. That's not. But I do love animals. I was driving the other day, and there was a big eagle, a big hawk that was on the ground, and a car, it didn't get up fast enough, and that car hit that hawk, and man, it killed it. And the thing was on the ground, and there was just a gut feeling. It's just, you know what I'm talking about, where you just feel bad. You're like, oh man, well, I just saw a death. But I want to tell you that as much as I love animals and care about animals, you're more valuable than the animals. Okay? You just are. Jesus didn't die for that hawk. Jesus died for you. And animals don't have souls. Okay? And that's the example he uses here. So you have these animals, birds, and birds aren't worried. Now, don't get the wrong lesson here. Jesus is not telling us to live like birds. He's saying don't live like birds when it comes to worry. He's not suggesting that we quit planting crops, that we quit harvesting, that we quit storing food in barns. These are all means that God has provided for us humans to feed ourselves. Jesus is not forbidding thought or even forethought. He's only forbidding anxious thought. He's telling us that we don't need to fret and stew and worry about the necessities of life, because the same Father that enables birds to survive in their surroundings and with their instincts will provide for us in ours. So how does God feed the birds? Does he drop worms into their nests? Does he catch fish and lay them out on the beach for the seagulls? Does he put sacks of bird seed out in the forest. No, God feeds them by giving them the instinct and the ability to find food and participate in the great process he himself sets up, which we call the food chain. But they do not worry about where their next meal is going to come from. Like my wife loves birds. So every day she goes out, she puts out bird feed. And our house is, so we have a part of our deck it's the bird section. It's loaded with poop. Bird poop is what it is, because they all land there and they eat. And, so man, those birds, when they hit the Doss house, they hit the jackpot, buddy. They hit the jackpot, and she'll go out there when it snows and clear the snow off and put the bird feed down. She loves the birds. So that's God's way of putting that in Karen's heart to care for these birds, and that's how these birds get fed. So if God cares for the birds that don't have a soul, like we had a bird die yesterday. It hit the house. It hit the window next to the thing. It came in hot. And it went out hot. It hit the house hard, man. I don't know, it's a special bird. Was not really. Did God care about that bird? Yeah, he did. How much more does he care about you? What did Joe kind of emphasize in worship today? That we're God's kids. I'm in the family of God. God is my father. I have 3 kids. And I got to be honest with you, I'm an earthly dad, and I made a lot of mistakes with my kids, and there's a lot of things I go back and I wish I could do over, but I can't. There's no need to worry about it. I just try to be a good dad now to my adult children. But I tell you that to say that I would be offended. I would have been offended if I'd have walked in their room one day and Matthew'd have been sitting there and he'd kind of have an anxious look, and I'd say, "Son, you okay?" And he's like, "Dad, I'm not sure you can take care of me." That would have offended me as his dad. Like when those kids were in the house, man, I'd have done whatever was necessary to take care of them, man. I would have worked most of the time I worked 2 jobs, but I worked 3 jobs. I'd have slept 2 hours. I'd done whatever is necessary to take care of those kids because they're my kids. Now, is God a better dad than me? A bazillion times. So the problem is we don't see God as our dad. Or we compare our God to our earthly dad because maybe you had a terrible dad and maybe he didn't take care of you. And so there's a little bitterness in your heart towards your earthly father, and you've transferred that to your heavenly father. But I'm going to tell you, as bad as your earthly father was, man, your heavenly father is so much better. And he's going to take care of you. He's going to take care of your basic needs. So it is unnecessary. And on some level, God has every right to be offended at me that I would be anxious about my future. God's got you. Rest in that. So worry is unnecessary. We got a God who loves us, and if he takes care of what would be perceived as this minimal part of creation, how much more will he take care of the people that were made in his image? Number 3, worry is unhealthy. It's unhealthy. Which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his lifespan? We are obsessed in our culture with physical health, and I understand that. I get it. I want to take care of myself. Every time I have voice issues, which I've had for the last few weeks, it always scares me. It causes me to realize that I don't trust my dad. How about that? So it's like, okay, what do I got to do? Well, I got to stop doing the sugar thing, because sugar causes inflammation, so I need to stop eating sugar. And so I always go on these diets. When I have these voice issues, I go on these diets to eliminate sugar out of my system, because I think that that's causing the inflammation. And I get kind of obsessed with it. The point being that I think that's not a bad thing, and I think it's a good thing that we take care of ourselves. I think it's a good thing you go to the gym and you work out, and we live in a culture where that's a pretty dominant thing. But let me tell you something. If you can be the healthiest dude in the world, but if you're loaded with worry, there's a lot of negative consequences that come with that. Do you know the word worry actually means to choke or to strangle? So when I'm worrying, in a sense, I am choking or strangling myself. If somebody put their hand around you and started to strangle you, you would fight them off. When I worry, I'm choking myself. Listen to what Charles Mayo, you heard of Mayo Clinic? Charles Mayo said this: worry affects the circulation, the heart, the glands, and the whole nervous system. This is what he said: I've never met a man or known a man to die of overwork, but I have known a lot of people who died of worry. I think it's a pretty powerful statement. It's unhealthy. You can't add a single hour to your life. So you can go to the gym, you can be as healthy as you can be, but you can drop dead of a heart attack because you're so anxious, worried up. You can cause your blood pressure to go through the roof, not because of anything that physically is wrong with you, but because you've gotten so anxious about your job, about the market, about the finances, about our kids, about the future, about the president, about the politicians, and kill yourself. Worry's unhealthy. Worry's unfaithful, Jesus says. The fourth thing he says, worry's unfaithful. So he talked about the birds, now he's going to talk about the lilies of the field. And he's not talking about maybe some of the pretty flowers that you intentionally plant. He's just talking about there's some beautiful stuff that grows up just naturally. My parents lived in the Dallas-Fort Worth area for a while, and there's these things that come up out of the grass. I don't know what they're called. I should know. I should have used this. I should have thought as an example before I got up here. But when I go down and see them sometimes I think they kind of sprout in particular right before winter hits. And a lot of people go down there and they take pictures. Like you see them on the side of the road and they're taking senior pictures and stuff in these wild flowers that are growing. Kind of like what I thought was really cool this year around us is it seemed like there were sunflowers everywhere, just kind of growing on the side of the road. So he uses that as an example. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothed the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? God dresses the flowers. He designed them. He gave them their color. He thought up their shape. And when you get right down to it, you have to admit that he did a pretty good job. Here's Jesus' reasoning. Flowers dress better than kings, yet they are temporal while we are eternal. In other words, God does better work than men. The first time we went to Vegas, somebody said, man, you got to go see the Hoover Dam. Hoover Dam. You got to go see the Hoover Dam. Okay, we'll go see the Hoover Dam. So we went to see the Hoover Dam, and it's cool. And then I went to the Grand Canyon. So the Hoover Dam's cool, but have you seen the Grand Canyon? It's cooler. The Golden Gate Bridge is an architectural wonder, but have you seen the ocean? The Eiffel Tower is iconic, but have you seen the Swiss Alps? You've been to Colorado, and it doesn't make you stand there and go, wow, what an architectural thing. Right? You go, wow, what a God. What a God that would do this. One writer put it this way: you believe that God can redeem you, save you from sin, break the shackles of Satan, take you to heaven where he's prepared a place for you, and keep you for all eternity, and yet you do not trust him to provide your daily needs. It's faithless on our part. We are to live by faith, not by sight. God's got us. He'll take care of us. We'll be okay. Even if we die, we'll be okay. Y'all with me this morning? Worry is unfaithful. It's a slap in the face of God. Number 5, worry is ungodly. Worry is ungodly. Therefore, do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. One of the problems, I think, with worry and why we don't really deal with it is we classify worry as an acceptable sin. Like it's in the acceptable sin. Because we have acceptable sins. Like, oh, it's really bad to steal from people and to murder people. And it is bad to do those things. It's bad to lie and to cheat. And those are bad. But there are things that we do as Christians all the time that we give the wink and the nod to, and it's like, he's just being human. Like pride, like jealousy, like gossip, and like worry. But to worry is to really be atheistic. See, we say we believe in God, but we don't really believe that God can take care of us. So we worry about it. I'm not casting stones here, folks. I'm the chiefest of sinners in this room. Like, I thought I'd quit worrying about my kids. I worry about them more now that they're out of the house than when we're in the house. At least I had control there, And now we got grandkids. So now the whole world's going to hell in a handbasket. And, what are my kids going to... And it's just... And you know what I do when I do that? I'm living like an atheist. It's what the Gentiles do. Unbelievers look at the birds and the flowers, and they comment about the wonders that evolution has produced. I feel sorry for them. No, God made that. Phil Yancey wrote of the atheist, he says, "It is a terrible thing to be grateful and have no one to thank, to be awed and have no one to worship." But we have a Father to thank and to worship. And what a God he is. Because this is the deal. He knows what we need before we do. That's what the verses imply. We can trust God that his knowledge will be translated into provision. It's just ungodly. It's a sin. It's a sin to worry, if I can be so blunt. So when you start your morning with the Lord's Prayer, walking through the Lord's Prayer, and you come to that part where it says, "Father, forgive us our debts," and you're like, I can't really think of anything I did wrong yesterday. I guarantee you can add worry to that list. Forgive me, Father, for not trusting you. Forgive me for laying in my bed, worrying about the church, for worrying about my kids, for worrying about Berkeley or Finn or Juniper, for worrying about their safety and their protection. Forgive me, God, for not trusting you. That's a sin. Worry is ungodly. It's what the unbelievers do. The unbelievers have every right to be completely anxious about who their next leaders will be. We do not, because though we may have new leaders, we have a sovereign God. So we're going to be okay. To worry is ungodly. It is to live atheistic. It is to say we believe in God, but to not act like we really believe it. And then number 6, worry is unwise. Verse 34, "Therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." Somebody said this, and I think it's the greatest description of worry. Worry is like sitting in a rocket chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't take you anywhere. Right? I mean, you're working the rocket chair, but you ain't moving. You can do it for hours and hours, and you stay in the same location. Tomorrow is in God's hand. I need to focus on that. Let me ask y'all a question. Is it hard to live sometimes? Of course it is. So the point Jesus is making here is life is tough enough today. Let's not drag tomorrow's unknown problems into today's realistic issues. John Stott said this, "For if our fear does not materialize, we have worried once for nothing. If it does materialize, we have worried twice instead of once. In both cases, it is foolish. Worry doubles trouble." Don't worry about your stock. They're going to go down. Right? And then it's going to go back up, and then it's going to go down. I know we have a lot of things. And look, I was talking to some of the young guys about the sermon this week, and it's interesting, their perspective and my perspective, because of the fact that a lot of them are, they got their whole lives ahead of them, man. They're not worried about stuff. Whereas I find that as I get older and I have more responsibilities, I have more, in a sense, to worry about. So when I was young, old people were telling me that, hey, man, I wouldn't start a church. That's scary stuff. Well, I do think as I get older, I find myself being in the same boat where I'm like, don't do that, man. Because I find that worry tends to be something that happens to us more as we get older because we have more to lose. Doesn't make it wise, though. It's basically living tomorrow, and I don't know what tomorrow brings. I got enough to deal with today. This is why, man, I used to really struggle on Saturday nights to sleep because Sunday's coming. Well, what did that tell you about me? I got a worry problem. Because no amount of me sitting there in bed thinking about church today, or whatever, the night before, is not going to make the thing go any better the next day. It's just unwise. It's just kind of a foolish use of our time. So if you as an older person look at a young kid watching him play video games all day and you say, what a waste of time. Well, how about us older people? We stop wasting our time worrying. It's just as foolish as somebody wasting their time doing something that brings no benefit. It doesn't bring any benefit. It doesn't change one thing about tomorrow. So it's just, Jesus is saying, just deal with one day at a time. Live one day at a time. Live 1 hour at a time, 1 minute at a time. Deal with what you got in front of you, and then you go to bed, wake up tomorrow, and deal with the stuff tomorrow. Some of you got 5-year-olds and you're worried about where they're going to go to college. Stop. You got 12 years ahead of you. Let's worry about their kindergarten class. Am I going to have enough for retirement? Probably not. Am I being too negative today? Have you seen inflation? Yeah, right. You know what? We got a good dad. I got a good dad. You got a good dad. Rest in that. So when you feel that anxiety coming on, man, let the worry turn into worship. Turn on a praise song. I'm not going to live in this world. I'm not going to live in this world of negativity. I'm not going to live in this world of sin. I'm going to trust my Heavenly Father. And it is funny, man. We will trust Him to save our souls, but we're not sure He can give us a loaf of bread. We're going to be okay because we got a good dad. And even if we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, He'll be right there with us. Right? Rest in that, okay? So let's bow our heads. Man, I'm finishing 9 minutes early today. I had 6 points. See, y'all were worried about the 6 points, man. Bow your heads, if you would. Would you give your worries to God? What are you worried about? Is it your finances? Is it your future? What is it? Is it your kids? Is it your family? Is it your grandkids? Is it your job? What is it that just keeps you awake at night? Cast all your cares on him. He cares about you. So right now, let's just be silent. And in your mind, whatever your worries are, give it to God.